Hey everybody, this is a wonderful, wonderful Instagram Live. Here we are. Gonna be joined very shortly with Eva Goicochea, who is a great business person and awesome. Right now. There we are. Hey, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
It's good. This is how you got to catch up with people these days. You got to schedule an Instagram live with them to get them on the phone.
It's true. Okay, wait, I can hear myself. Hold on, it's probably these earphones. Give me a second. Whoa. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I might just have to talk out loud and the whole office will hear me.
But can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So it sounds good. All right. So, first of all, where are you right now? You're in New York.
I'm in New York. I'm in the office.
And I'm in Detroit. And we're just for some background, I'm right now one of the ambassadors for the Create California campaign, which is an initiative to help bring awareness to the importance of art and arts education in California schools. The story is that it's already been mandated and legislated that all California public schools get art. But what we found is that only 12% of schools were actually fulfilling this requirement even before COVID. And so one of the things that this initiative is doing is trying to bring people who have a connection to art and to arts education and who didn't grow up to be painters and all this stuff necessarily. They grew up to be other things, business people, politicians, what have you. And so you're someone who I've always known as someone who has, a creative spirit and artistic spirit and is a change maker in their own way, but not an artist, so to speak, by profession. So I wanted to invite you on here, and also you're one of my favorite people on planet Earth, to kind of tell us.
Respond to my last email.
I know, I owe you an email. That's the way it works when you get to this level. You're like, hey, how are you? Can I ask you something? And you're like, well, you actually owe me an email. And I'm like, oh, my bad. But it's all love. So I'm glad you're able to meet with me here. But I guess the first story is, hey, how do you see yourself in your role in the world? And what do you do for a living? And then maybe we'll go into a little bit of what has been your relationship to arts and arts education.
Yeah. So I'm the founder and CEO of MOD, which is a modern sexual wellness company. I mean, we definitely have a design bent, as you can see from behind me. I help build the brand from scratch, and it's something that, we lead with design. I believe we're really a company built on both art and science. I think it's really important to have both brains at the table, whether that's in one person's head or multiple people's heads. And I've been working on MOD for over 5 years, and the business has been around for 2.5 live. So, yeah, we're in Brooklyn. But the arts means a lot to me. I was raised by an arts educator.
So, what was your life like as a person developing a sense of identity or agency and like creativity and your eye for design? How did that come to be, and like what was little Eva like as a kid?
I had the exact same haircut, no surprise. No, so I was raised in New Mexico, obviously a state that really celebrates the arts. My mother she got her master's in arts education, and I was primarily raised by my mother, who took me while she was getting her master's to school with her. So like I would sit in her sculpture classes and I would sit in her arts classes, and she originally was an artist. She was a sculptor, and that doesn't entirely pay the bills. So she got her master's in arts education, like I said, and she ended up going on to build out programs in California for arts education. So we went from New Mexico to California. And the biggest thing that I remember from my childhood is that the school I went to in New Mexico, which was a public school, had like this award-winning arts education program. They put so much emphasis on, a multitude of art. And then I went to California, and it was like just your basic everyday public school. It was boring. I was uninspired. I was a bored kid, but I was always into computers. So that's kind of what saved me. But it was a clear transition from focus on the arts to no focus on the arts. Only in the house was there a focus on the arts.
Okay, so you got it. Once you got to California, it was mostly in the house at that point.
Yeah.
So how do you think that, if we were to fly forward, what kind of, it's like when you taking an algebra class, you're like, oh, the Pythagorean theorem, I'm never going to use this in real life, But when we talk about arts education, now you are officially a CEO of a business, and that is not necessarily seen as the most artistic job. But, what parts of that upbringing and what part of those tenets of having an education that included arts are you taking advantage of now, like in your daily life as a CEO, as a startup founder?
I think that an arts education, or the opportunity to be exposed to and create art, is absolutely an education and an opportunity to grow yourself emotionally. And what I find is that makes me different than most founders that I know who maybe just went to business school, who were focused on that growing up, or who had that pressure growing up. I didn't have that pressure. I had the opportunity to sort of think outside of the box, as cliche as that sounds. And what that meant was I was able to work on my emotional intelligence and understand diversity and be around different kinds of artists and see that art wasn't just paintings on paper. It was also multimedia and, video and digital design and so many things. It's not just art. It's not fine art always.
Yep.
And then that's led to me being able to build a brand that has emotional resonance with people. And in this category, if you don't have that, then you're irrelevant. So it's intrinsic to our company. It's intrinsic to our business. And I also think it's really intrinsic to individuals to be able to foster art and expression growing up.
I love that. It brings me up. I didn't know I was going to talk about this, but I realized that your brand actually started and is now continued to do with the modern very heavily around art,
Yeah.
like the imagery that you use to talk about the products you use is very curated and it's very polished. Can you tell me why it makes sense to have a publication like Modern as a part of, either, why do you think that's important that you guys continue to invest in, content and art?
Well, I'm smiling because I think you could argue, and I won't go off, on a tangent, but you could argue that the way that the category has been approached for so long is so transactional. It's so commoditized. It's without emotion. It's often connected to the transaction and saying, like, you need a condom so you won't have a kid. You need birth control. And let's be honest, like, sex is about human emotion. There's so many layers. There's guilt and shame, but there's also happiness and pleasure and intimacy and all of those things. And as a brand that stands for positive intimacy, we need to build out that world and that ecosystem that reflects that, because that's really what it's about. And that's how you create change for people culturally, is to create a place that's really comfortable and human. And that requires emotion, and emotion is connected to art. In fact, art is just the expression of emotion. So
Yeah.
If we just had a condom line, which I've seen a few of them, and they're really like, just buy us, we're cheaper or we're more expensive, I'm like, good luck. That's not what resonates with people.
Right. It's the most human category that there could be. And to take the human part of it out would be, I could see that being a disservice. So when you think about your work now and how you ended up in this industry, I don't see a straight line, and so could you give us a little bit of your, your professional background, like before you just, okay, now I'm going to start a company?
I actually think it's weirdly a straight line. It's more like a line with different, like, rest stops along the way, right? Because I studied marketing and organizational communications. I had a lot of exposure to sort of what was digital at the time. I'm 38. I graduated college in the early 2000s. And then I became a legislative aide in healthcare, which was formative and foundational for what I'm doing now. And then I went back into marketing and really was at brands very early. I mean, you and I met really early in the startup world. So to me, it's been a very straight line in terms of laying the groundwork for what I do now. I would say I'm probably, on paper, being a legislative aide versus working at an agency that has Adidas as a client, they don't seem very similar. But when you think about the human side of it and trying to solve for human need, a lot of the same skills and communication tools were the same.
Right.
So
right.
wherever my place was in those companies has felt like I'm using the same.
Right. So wherever you are applying your actual skill might be different. It might be in government, it might be in business, it might be for marketing, but really what you're trying to do is leverage your ability to touch people and get a message across.
Yeah.
And so now though, you've forayed into the world of physical things, not just content and intellectual property, but tangible design and things like that. So as you're in that area, when you're thinking about, this material or that material, is this hypoallergenic or, all those kind of things, like the more of the, I don't want to say sciencey, but those more of those tangible things, what kind of lens are you putting on when you approach those tasks?
So Mod was really built on design and like simplicity and creating products that were really universal and easy to use. So just from a straight design perspective, that was always built into how are we going to build the product? How are we going to make small tweaks to make it better? And one of the things that I'm really excited about is like product design and sort of, arts movements that have led to these sort of like the outpouring of products that are mass, but also designed smartly for people, right? So that's kind of how I think of Mod, is like we're creating products. Right now we're in the MoMA. We're in the MoMA design store. They have an exhibit. That's where this started. I saw a shape that was kind of like the vibe, and I was like, this is the shape that the vibe should be.
Yeah.
So it's kind of full circle in terms of thinking about how we really started with design inspiration, and then that's become what the company is built off of, and now we're in the MoMA store. But
I love that idea of full circle, because not everyone can recognize the way that art manifests ideas, and then the way those ideas spread into design and engineering. And someone might say, okay, I'm reading Nietzsche, and then next thing you know, because I'm reading Nietzsche, I'm now painting a different thing than I was painting.
Yeah.
And because someone else who's an engineer, sees that painting that was inspired by Nietzsche, and they're now, creating a whole creating engineering standards and architectural standards that influence the way we actually move through the world. So when you think of your role now as your formal title is like CEO, what are the pieces inside of that title for you specifically that you end up using on a daily basis?
well, so I'm the head of people, and I'm the head of brand, and I work closely with our marketing team, and I work closely with our product team. But I think at the end of the day, I'm the shepherd of the brand, and the brand is rooted in the design and vision for the company, and I'm the gatekeeper. And everybody else is the gatekeeper in their own unique way, and we all work together. But I'm very much touching all of these functions of the company. I'm not the type of founder that's just in Excel.
Well, you're the.
I
guess what I'm getting at is that before you're a freelancer, and you have to wear 10 different hats in order to just like get a client and then make the client happy and then send the invoice. But now as a CEO, you go to work every day. How many hats are you wearing a day anyway?
A lot of hats. But I also think that the capacity in which I worked between Everlane and now was like really the reason I didn't go back into a company, because I was excited to help other people build their brands and their businesses. And so I was really enjoying wearing all those hats, and that's why I started my own studio and kept running with it for as many years as I did, because I got to jump in and help, people build their brand and their vision, and then get to hand it off to them and see what they could do with it. And so I'm just doing the same thing for mod. It's just a much longer, tenure than it is when you're helping a client.
So your client is now your company.
Yeah, and I owe my company every day, in terms of moving it forward and thinking about it outside of myself. It's not synonymous with me. It's an outside entity that I am responsible for, and that's how I think about it. So it is like having a very big client.
Right. And so when you're now approaching your work and you're thinking about, who you're serving, what kind of systems do you guys use internally? Are you having like big meetings where it's like all staff and then you're like, or are you working with individual teams? The reason I ask is because part of the design of your products has to also do with the design of your company and how you do things. So I just want to hear a little bit about that, just to kind of highlight the different aspects that go into what we think of as a singular job.
Well, so I'm laughing because there's only 5 of us.
Okay.
So the big meetings are the small meetings. As a company, we're really organized, and we probably are prepared to have a team that's much bigger than we are, just because we operate that way. Like, we put everything, we use all of these platforms where, like, as a team, you could jump in tomorrow at the company and I think you would pick up on all of it because it's right there for you. So that's been...
Is that a job offer? Because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, you're willing to move from Detroit? We're like the last company standing going to the office. I think just in terms of thinking through organizational design, one thing, I finished my degree in organizational communications, and I kind of like laughed it off thinking this is not, what is this going to mean one day? And actually it means everything. And so how we think about communication and collaboration and organization, they all are really part of what can outwardly make us successful, because internally we feel like we're set and we know what we're doing. So,
and do you think that, one of the things that makes art really important is that young students who take art courses for a prolonged period of time develop better interpersonal, social, emotional skills, whether that's shyness and, being able to communicate themselves. How about the people that show up at your organization? Do they tend to be, artistic or creative?
Yeah, I mean, everybody here comes from a totally different background in terms of what state they're from, but everybody has a bit of at least the 5. So we have 5 internally, and then we have our CFO and our chief planning officer who sit outside of the organization. So I would say the left brain side, the operational side, sort of sits outside of the company, but internally, everybody here brings an artistic skill set to the table. Someone here studied graphic information systems. Someone here studied, advertising. Someone studied products. Like, everybody comes from that angle, and I think it means that mod functions better because we all sort of see both sides.
I think that's one of the things that people don't always notice. This study came out, I think it was from New Zealand or maybe even somewhere else in South Asia, but it showed that most people think that art is the least essential job in a pandemic. But, they don't realize that art's actually embedded in pretty much every part of society. And, to hear you say that, someone's holding an object in their hand, it's maybe like has a little bag on it and it has some words on it. And you think that you're purchasing it because of the function that it can serve in your life. But maybe the reason you purchase that specific one is because of everything else about it.
Well, isn't it funny? Like, you've seen Devil Wears Prada?
Yes.
And that scene, that we all know the scene, right? With Meryl Streep, where she's talking about, you think you're just wearing a blue sweater, and like someone made that decision for you. And I think that's really, if you look around the world, that's how everything is. When I think of art, I do think that people usually think of it as like fine art. I don't think that they understand that it applies to everything because it's also design and it's engineering. But I think of it as all of those things too.
And language. I realized the other day that a political science degree is an art degree.
It is.
And that a lawyer is a doctor of art. You know, they're a doctor of letters and of language. And, you know, I think the left-right brain, even though there's problems with that binary, I think it's really helpful and for us to realize that, you know, pretty much everything that is not does this turn on or off because of electricity, you know, plug it in, unplug it. Pretty, you know, music is art too. Everything else has to do with decisions about human behavior and human understanding. And, you know, we have to take that into account. And all of that, everything in that domain is art.
It is art. I mean, we had an article on The Modern about the science of smell and like, why is it important that we offer products that have a particular scent? What does that evoke? What does that mean? It's actually imprinting memory that's connected to then your sex life. And like, it's so interesting how much we don't, I mean, I make this joke all the time, but I'm actually quite serious, which is like sex is the subtext everywhere you go, everything you see. You're in that bar with that mood lighting, the music, whether we like it or not. Sometimes it's like, okay, enough. But in general, I think that's really what's happening. Is that we're like,
I think
there's a lot of
art of
mood
smell. The art of smell is really important. There's a gallery in Los Angeles, the Institute of Art and Olfaction, and I went to an incredible talk where there was a woman I'm a smell designer, and you know, she talked about it from the fine art perspective, but she also talked about it from the standpoint of, you know, you think that when you buy laundry detergent, what is that like really, that's not the way spring actually smells. A group of people got together in a room and came up with the smell for spring. Yeah. You know, that was 100% designed. And you think that your grape jelly tastes like grapes, but it's actually a room full of people determining that that's what grape should
you think
like.
You just bought that jelly, but actually someone designed that for you.
Someone designed that smell, and someone designed that taste, and someone designed, you know, oftentimes what we think of like the shape of a muffin was designed. You know, these are implications that have to do with us. And I think the beauty of design is it does blend the science and art together. Yeah. Maybe that's one of the best definitions of design.
Right. And I think that's the way to get people to understand the utility and importance of art is to maybe use the word design. I would then say though, there's a funny question around like if you were sort of advocating for design in schools, I don't know if people would understand what that means, right? So it's...
Yeah, I think one of the things that I realized when you were saying this is that you talked about The Devil Wears Prada and you think you're wearing a blue shirt, but someone decided. I think one of the biggest values for arts education is training people and helping young people in the practice of making decisions. Yeah. You know, and where are they, what basis are they making decisions from? Are they making them to be expressive, or are they making them to serve a particular purpose or to solve a problem?
Is there, like STEM, is there an acronym for the arts and design? Is there some way to rebrand this?
Yeah, so one of the things that people do is there was such a very high focus on STEM that what they did is they added an A and they're calling it STEAM. And they're real because people realize that STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, was only half of the educational opportunity. Right. And so they added the A, which is science, technology, engineering, art, math.
Great.
And that's actually a much more comprehensive view. And what we're talking about when we say art, I find that what we're actually talking about is the humanities.
Right.
More broadly.
I agree.
You know, not just red or blue, but why red and why blue?
Right.
You know, and what does that mean to you when we say, you know, so how do you all think about color and like making statements without making statements via aesthetic and things like that?
At Mod.
Yeah.
So as you know, we're really built on inclusivity and this idea of like the fact that gender and sex have been so intertwined, especially in the industry and what's reflected in the industry around, you know, blue products for men and pink products for women. And, you know, we talk a lot about how it infantilizes people. And as you're an adult and you're sort of navigating what you like, just because you're a woman or a man or a them or an other, doesn't mean that you like pink.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to create a color palette that felt universal and it felt really rooted in colors you would find in, sorry, my battery told me it was about to die. And I think that was part of it. Like our brand language is colors that are inclusive, symbols that are inclusive, all of it matters. And that's why we haven't really gone outside of our palette, is because we're trying to create this really inclusive world in which you can jump in no matter what you like. So colors.
I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that you have as sort of like you're making these products that people can touch and purchase and use, but they're like a cornerstone of either building a life and a world around it or bringing them into a world that of choice, you know, like, yeah. You know, you're saying, hey, we're making some very intentional choices for like, people who make intentional choices.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that happens with color is that when you're using bright pinks and blues, not that I have an issue with any of those colors, you're also essentially indicating that it's for younger people. And we heard that feedback a lot, which is like, the industry speaks to a really young audience and you have sex throughout your adult life. Like, why is there no brand that speaks to all adults?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the other piece about it, is that we have to think about all the ways where we're communicating without it being explicitly stated, and how we know. I mean, when you're driving around and, you know, you live in New York, but you drive a car, you don't stop.
You can't tell everybody that, Maceo.
Yeah, yeah. You don't stop. You don't always stop because it says stop. You stop because the light's red, and you go because the light's green. And so color is communication, and there's subconscious communication that's happening whether we know it or not. And you have to, I think, have a literacy around the world that you live in. So when you're you know, looking at the future and the world that you're, you know, building or want to live in, you know, how do you think about, you know, what evolutions Mod might take, or what, you know, don't give away the secret sauce, you know, this is obviously, there's a whole bunch of people on here, but you know, as
one of them's my aunt, so shout out to my Aunt Linda.
Hey, what's up, Linda? As you're thinking forward, you know, what place in the world do you hope Mod begins to fill or continues to fill?
I think we say it a lot, but we're trying to create the next chapter in the industry. And what does that mean? It means like a common language and a common perception and a common understanding around sex in a way that has, you know, hopefully we've evolved the conversation so that there is basic access and basic understanding. And as a company, we want to stay really consistent to what we stand for, which is like sexual health and wellness, you know, giving you really well-designed, safe products. But we're not going to go so far outside the lines, like, because there is such a need for just that. So when I think of the future, I'm like, I actually hope that we create such a common understanding that from that comes evolution, whether that's in the form of other brands or new ways to talk about sex or how we think about dating and relationships. Like, we hope to be a part of that.
Well, the last question, I love that answer. The last question, because I know you're busy, is actually a personal one, but we've talked about it. So I feel like you'll be comfortable answering it. But you're not, you know, you're totally sexy, but you're not a sexual, like, you know, loud sexual person, and Maud isn't either. So there's something about the world of the products that you're in terms of communication and the way that they're marketing. It's all very like cheeky and loud. And, you know, what has inspired you, of all understated people that I know in my life, you know, to go into this category, you know, that most people would presume based on aesthetic isn't your, you know, brand, your personal brand. You know?
Well, it's funny because it's like, if we were talking about food, and for 100 years it had only been pizza, I think you would understand that there's room for representation of all types of food and all ways to communicate about food, and elevated food and not so elevated food. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. It's like a homogenized world. We've been force-fed the same crap for 100 years. It's been misogynistic, it's been sexist, it's been ageist, it's all of these things. And like, there is so much room to see other types of people and other ways to talk about sex, especially since sex is such a normal human thing. So I actually think I'm the right person to do it, because I'm coming at it by saying, let's fight for the diversity of thought around what sex really means in our lives, and how much we should have, I think, a respect for the fact that it touches other parts of our lives besides this like compartmentalized corner of your bedroom on Saturday night. Like, that's not really what sex looks like for most people.
Yeah, I love that you know, I think it's amazing that you sell a candle, because you've brought out the experience to more than just these devices that produce, you know, a particular kind of stimulation. There's a nasal and an aura and an ambiance that's all a part of the sexual experience. And I think that does elevate it, and it gives people an opportunity, much like art, to see things from different vantage points.
Yeah, and I think that the more that we can destigmatize sex, the more that it becomes a part of our everyday conversation in ways that really starts when it is the most crucial period, which is like when you're in high school, and then when you're in college and you're navigating who you are. And if you feel like it's not something that's scary and that you have to be afraid of or ashamed of, like, what kind of impact is that for who we are as a society? I'm not trying to get political, but I will say that sexism and this industry has not helped the state that we're in. It really
All right. Well, look, I don't know what the stipulations are on this Instagram. It might not last that long. It might be taken down. But for those who came with us for this live, thank you so much. And Eva, of course, big hug. I miss you so much, but I'm happy to see you. I will check your email. And, you know, for those that want to go to createca.org and sign the pledge, you can learn more about your local school board administrators, and you can get on their case to make sure your schools have arts education. Please follow Maud. It's, what is it? Maud.
It's Get Maud, because we couldn't just Get Maud. Yeah.
Follow Get Maud, and you know, support what they're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good to see your face.
Yeah, for sure. And have a good day.
You too. Bye.
All right.